When a bitter retired F1 driver publicly confronted Lewis Hamilton about his Ferrari move at Monza, warning him about dark secrets from 1999, Lewis thought it was just another angry fan. But what the seven-time world champion discovered next would change everything he thought he knew about Ferrari, force him to question his biggest career decision, and ultimately lead to the most important victory of his life. One that had nothing to do with racing. What Lewis does next will heal wounds that have been bleeding for 25 years, and transform one man's broken dreams into hope for an entire generation. The roar of Ferrari engines echoed across the Monza paddock as Lewis Hamilton walked through the sea of red-clad fans. September in Italy meant one thing: the home race for the prancing horse. The air was thick with excitement, pasta sauce from nearby food trucks, and the smell of burning rubber from practice sessions. Lewis pulled his Mercedes cap lower over his eyes. Even though he'd announced his move to Ferrari for 2025, walking through Monza still felt strange. These fans would soon be his fans. This track would soon be his home race too. Lewis. Lewis. A group of Italian teenagers called out in English, waving Ferrari flags. He smiled and signed a few autographs, their excitement making him feel warm inside. One young girl, maybe 10 years old, looked up at him with huge brown eyes. "Will you win for Ferrari?" she asked in careful English. "I'll try my best," Lewis promised, ruffling her hair. That's all anyone can do. As he walked away, Lewis thought about those words. Trying his best had gotten him 7 world championships with 2 different teams. But Ferrari was different. Ferrari wasn't just a team, it was a dream, a passion, a way of life for millions of people around the world. The paddock buzzed with journalists, team members, and VIPs. Lewis nodded to familiar faces as he made his way toward the Mercedes hospitality unit. He had media duties before practice started, then a meeting with his engineer about setup changes for qualifying. Hamilton. The voice was sharp, angry. Lewis turned to see a man in his early 50s walking toward him. The man was average height with graying hair and deep lines around his eyes. He wore a simple white polo shirt and dark jeans. Nothing fancy, nothing that marked him as someone important in the F1 world. But there was something in the man's face that made Lewis stop walking. Something intense and hurt and very, very angry. "You're Lewis Hamilton," the man said, stepping closer. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Lewis replied carefully. "Can I help you?" The man looked Lewis up and down, his jaw tight. "I'm Marco Santini. Does that name mean anything to you?" Lewis thought for a moment. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Should it?" Marco's laugh was bitter. "No, I guess it shouldn't. That's the whole point, isn't it?" Other people in the paddock were starting to notice. A few journalists had their phones out, probably recording. Lewis saw his press officer, Sarah, hurrying over with a concerned look. "Listen, if there's something you want to discuss." Lewis started. "You think you deserve the red suit?" Marco interrupted, his voice getting louder. "You think you have any idea what Ferrari really means? What it costs?" Lewis felt his heart rate increase. This wasn't just a fan wanting an autograph or a photo. This was something else. Something personal and painful. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you're talking about," Lewis said, trying to keep his voice calm and respectful. "Of course you don't." Marco stepped closer, close enough that Lewis could see the pain in his dark eyes. "You get the phone call, you sign the contract, you put on the red suit. Easy as that, right?" "It wasn't easy," Lewis replied honestly. The decision to leave Mercedes was very difficult. Marco shook his head. "You don't know what difficult is. You have no idea what Ferrari takes from people. What it gives and then steals away." A small crowd was gathering now. Lewis could see camera phones pointed in their direction. This was going to be all over social media in minutes. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion here," Lewis said, glancing towards Sarah, who was now standing nearby with security. "No confusion," Marco said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I know exactly who you are and exactly what you're walking into. I gave everything for that team. Everything. My career, my future, my heart. All of it. And they threw me away like I was nothing." Lewis felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about racing. This was about something deeper, something that had been eating at this man for years. "I'm sorry for whatever happened to you," Lewis said sincerely. "But I don't think I'm the right person." You're exactly the right person, Marco cut him off. Because you're about to make the same mistake I made. You're about to trust them. The security guards moved closer, but Lewis held up a hand to stop them. Something about Marco's pain felt real and important. What mistake? Lewis asked. Marco's eyes filled with tears, but his voice remained strong. Believing that talent matters more than politics. Thinking that if you're fast enough, good enough, dedicated enough, they'll give you what you deserve. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I was Ferrari's test driver in 1999. Do you know what that means? Lewis nodded. It means you were preparing to be a race driver. It means I was the fastest driver they had who wasn't already racing, Marco said. When Schumacher got hurt at Silverstone, I thought my time had come. I thought all those years of work, all those perfect test sessions, all that speed, I thought it finally mattered. Lewis was beginning to understand. But you didn't get the race seat. They gave it to Mika Salo instead. A good driver, sure, but not faster than me. Everyone knew it. The engineers knew it. The mechanics knew it. Even Michael knew it. Marco's voice dropped to almost a whisper. But the sponsors? The people with money and power? They knew something else. They knew I didn't fit their plans. Lewis felt sick to his stomach. He'd heard stories like this before. Talented drivers passed over for reasons that had nothing to do with racing. But hearing it from someone who had lived it, seeing the pain still fresh after all these years, made it real in a way that hurt. I'm sorry, Lewis said, meaning it completely. That shouldn't have happened to you. Sorry. Doesn't give me back 25 years, Marco replied. Sorry doesn't give me the career I should have had. The life I should have lived. He looked directly into Lewis's eyes. There are things about Ferrari you don't know, Hamilton. Dark things. Things that destroy people from the inside out. The security guard stepped forward again, but Marco raised his hands and stepped back on his own. Ask them about the 1999 season, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the paddock. Ask them what really happened to me. Ask them about the promises they made and the promises they broke. Marco turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back. And ask yourself this. When they're done with you, when you've given them everything you have, will you be able to live with what they took? He disappeared into the crowd, leaving Lewis standing alone with dozens of eyes watching him and questions burning in his mind. Sarah rushed over. Lewis, are you okay? Should we call the police? Lewis shook his head, still staring in the direction Marco had gone. No, he wasn't threatening me. He was trying to warn me. A journalist approached with a microphone. Lewis, can you comment on what just happened? Who was that man? Lewis looked at the reporter, then at the Ferrari hospitality unit visible in the distance. The red flags fluttered in the breeze, beautiful and inviting, but now they seemed different somehow. Like they might be hiding something. No comment, Lewis said quietly, walking away. But as he headed toward the Mercedes garage, one question echoed in his mind. What really happened to Marco Santini in 1999? And more importantly, was he walking into the same trap? The roar of engines filled the air as practice session began. But Lewis barely heard it. All he could hear was Marco's voice. Ask them about the promises they made and the promises they broke. Ferrari had made Lewis promises too. Promises about championships, about legacy, about writing his name in history alongside the greatest drivers who had ever lived. For the first time since signing with Ferrari, Lewis wondered if those promises were real, or if they were just another way to break another driver's heart. Lewis sat on the edge of his hotel bed, laptop open in front of him, staring at the search results for Marco Santini Ferrari 1999. The screen glowed in the dim room as evening settled over Monza. He'd been scrolling for 2 hours, but the internet didn't give up its secrets easily. Most of the articles were in Italian. Lewis used Google Translate to read them, piecing together fragments of a story that felt incomplete. Marco Santini had been a test driver for Ferrari from 1997 to 2001. He'd been fast, really fast. Several articles mentioned lap times that were better than the race drivers. But there were gaps. Big ones. Lewis found a photo from the 1999 Italian Grand Prix weekend. It showed Michael Schumacher in a wheelchair, his right leg in a cast from the Silverstone crash that had ended his season. Standing behind him were several Ferrari team members, including a younger Marco Santini in team gear. The caption was in Italian, but Lewis translated it. Ferrari test driver Marco Santini prepares to step in if needed, as Michael Schumacher recovers from injury. If needed. But it never happened. Lewis clicked on another article, this one from a British motorsport magazine. The headline read, "Salo gets Ferrari chance as Schumacher recovers." There was a small mention of other drivers who had been considered, including promising test driver Marco Santini. Promising. That was all. Like Marco had been just another name on a list. Lewis's phone buzzed with a text from his trainer Angela. "Early morning workout tomorrow? Big practice day ahead." He typed back yes. "See you at s-" But Lewis knew he wouldn't sleep well tonight. Marco's words kept playing in his head. Ask him about the 19... Lewis picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Anthony Davidson. Anthony had raced in F1 during the 2000s and was now a Sky Sports commentator. More importantly, he'd been around the paddock during the late 1990s when Marco was at Ferrari. The phone rang 3 times before Anthony answered. "Lewis? Everything all right? It's nearly midnight. Sorry to call so late," Lewis said. "I need to ask you about something. About someone. Actually. Fire away. Do you remember Marco Santini? He was a Ferrari test driver around 9. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while. Why are you asking about Marco?" Lewis told Anthony about the confrontation at Monza, leaving out the most painful details but explaining that Marco seemed angry about something that happened during his time at Ferrari. Anthony said softly. "That explains a lot. What do you mean?" Anthony was quiet for a moment. Lewis could hear him moving around, probably making tea. Anthony always made tea when he had something serious to discuss. "Marco was incredibly talented," Anthony finally said. "I mean, scary fast. The kind of natural speed that can't be taught. When I was coming up through the junior categories, everyone knew about Marco Santini. He was the guy to beat." "So what happened?" "That's the thing. Nobody really knows the whole story. Marco was Ferrari's top test driver in '99. When Schumacher got hurt at Silverstone, everyone expected Marco to get the call. The mechanics loved him. The engineers said he was faster than anyone in testing. It seemed obvious." Lewis leaned forward. But Ferrari chose Mika Salo instead. Good driver, professional, experienced. But not necessarily faster than Marco. "That doesn't make sense." Anthony sighed. "Lewis, you've been in F1 long enough to know that the fastest driver doesn't always get the seat. There are politics, sponsor considerations, marketing appeal. Sometimes teams make decisions for reasons that have nothing to do with lap times." "What reasons?" "I honestly don't know. But whatever happened, it broke something in Marco. He stayed with Ferrari for a couple more years after that. But he was never the same. Always angry. Always bitter. He'd lost that spark that made him special." Lewis felt a heavy weight settling in his chest. "Do you think he was treated unfairly?" "I think Marco believed he was treated unfairly. And maybe he was right. The thing is, Lewis Ferrari in the late 90s was a different animal than it is now. There was more pressure, more politics, more darkness, I suppose." "What do you mean by darkness?" Anthony paused again. "There were rumors back then. About pressure from sponsors. About deals made behind closed doors. About drivers being promised things that never materialized. Nothing I could prove, but enough whispers to make you wonder." Lewis's stomach turned. "Anthony, do you think those problems still exist?" "Honestly, I don't know. Ferrari has changed a lot since then. New leadership, new culture. But Lewis," Anthony's voice became serious. "Be careful. Marco never got over what happened to him. He's been carrying that anger for 25 years. People who feel that betrayed, that deeply hurt, they can be unpredictable." After they hung up, Lewis sat in the dark room thinking about betrayal and broken promises. He thought about his own journey to Ferrari, the months of negotiations, the promises made by team principal Fred Vasseur, the excitement of finally wearing red. But he also thought about Marco's face, the pain that seemed carved into his features after all these years. Lewis opened his laptop again and searched deeper. He found a small Italian racing website with an interview from 2005. Marco had briefly returned to racing in a lower series, but quit after one season. The interviewer asked about his time at Ferrari. Marco's translated response was short. Ferrari taught me that dreams and reality are different things. Sometimes the dream is more beautiful. Lewis found another article from 2010 about Marco opening a driving school for young racers in a small town outside Milan. The article mentioned that he'd struggled with depression and financial problems after leaving F1. The last article Lewis found was from 2018. Marco had been arrested for disturbing the peace outside the Ferrari factory gates in Maranello. He'd been drunk, shouting about injustice and broken promises. The charges were dropped, but the article painted him as a sad figure living in the past. Lewis closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, Monza was quiet except for the distant sound of late-night traffic. Tomorrow, he'd climb into his Mercedes for practice, preparing for what might be one of his last races with the team before moving to Ferrari. His phone buzzed with another text, this one from his father Anthony Hamilton. Saw the news about some incident at the track today. You okay, son? Lewis typed back, I'm fine, Dad. Just thinking about things. Want to talk? Lewis almost said no, but then he remembered something. His father had been around racing for decades, supporting Lewis through karting and junior categories. If anyone might remember Marco Santini, it would be him. Dad, do you remember a driver named Marco Santini? Italian. Would have been racing in the late 90s? The response came quickly. Ferrari test driver, dark hair, very fast. That's him. I remember him. He was at some of the same events when you were karting. Nice kid, very talented, but something happened to him. He got bitter, started drinking. Why? Lewis explained about the confrontation, about Marco's warnings about Ferrari. His father's response made Lewis's blood run cold. Son, that man has been angry for a very long time. Whatever Ferrari did to him, it changed him completely. He used to be one of the good ones. Always encouraging to young drivers, always professional. After 99, he became someone else entirely. Do you think I should be worried about joining Ferrari? I think you should be worried about Marco Santini. People who carry that much pain, that much anger, they don't always make rational decisions. Lewis set the phone down and stared out at the Italian night. Tomorrow he'd have to face the media, answer questions about his future with Ferrari, smile for the cameras. But tonight, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something bigger than just a new team. Something that had been broken long before he arrived, and might break him too if he wasn't careful. Marco's words echoed in his mind. Ask them about the promises they made and the promises they broke. Lewis realized he was afraid to ask those questions, because he was starting to suspect he might not like the answers. Outside his window, the lights of Monza glittered like promises in the dark. Beautiful and distant and possibly impossible to reach. Just like Marco's dreams had been. All those years ago, 3 days had passed since Monza. Lewis was back in his London home, sitting in his studio where he worked on music between races. The piano keys were dusty. He hadn't played in weeks. His mind was too busy with other things. The Italian Grand Prix had gone well for Mercedes. Lewis had finished second, a solid result that kept him in the championship fight. But throughout the weekend, he'd found himself looking over his shoulder, wondering if Marco Santini was watching from somewhere in the crowd. The media had picked up on the paddock incident. Several websites had posted shaky phone videos of the confrontation. The headlines were typical: Mystery Man confronts Hamilton at Monza. And who is the angry Ferrari fan? But none of the reporters had figured out who Marco really was or why he'd been so upset. Lewis had done his best to deflect questions. Just a passionate fan, he told the press. Ferrari means a lot to people. But privately, he couldn't stop thinking about Marco's pain-filled eyes and the warning about broken promises. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The number was Italian, but Lewis didn't recognize it. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. Hello? Lewis Hamilton? The voice was familiar. Older, tired, but unmistakable. Marco. Yes. I owe you an apology. Lewis set down his coffee cup and gave the call his full attention. You don't owe me anything. I do. Marco's voice was quieter than it had been at Monza. Less angry, more sad. I shouldn't have confronted you like that. In public, in front of the cameras. It wasn't fair to you. You seemed like you needed to say something. Marco laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've needed to say something for 25 years. But you weren't the right person to say it to. It wasn't about you. Lewis walked to his window, looking out at the London street. Then what was it about? There was a long pause. Lewis could hear Marco breathing on the other end, could almost feel the weight of whatever he was carrying. It was about me, Marco finally said. About what I never got to become. About the anger I've been carrying around like a stone in my chest. Marco, can I ask you something? Of course. What really happened in 1999? I've been trying to research it, but I can't find the whole story. Another pause. This one longer. That's because the whole story was never told, Marco said. The newspapers got the basic facts. Schumacher got hurt. Salo got the drive. The season continued. But they didn't know about the promises that were made to me, or the reasons why those promises were broken. Lewis felt his heart rate increase. What promises? Can we meet? Marco asked suddenly. Face to face, somewhere private? There are things you need to know before you put on that red suit. Things that could help you avoid the mistakes I made. What kind of mistakes? The kind that destroy your faith in everything you thought was true about racing, about fairness, about merit, meaning something. Lewis thought about Anthony Davidson's warnings about Marco being unpredictable. But he also thought about the pain in Marco's voice, both at Monza and now on the phone. Where do you want to meet? There's a small cafe in Milan called Café della Pace. It's near the Duomo, but quiet. Tourists don't usually find it. Can you come next week? Lewis checked his mental schedule. He had a few days off before the next race. I can be there Thursday morning. Thank you, Marco said. And Lewis could hear real gratitude in his voice. Lewis, I need you to understand something. What I'm going to tell you, it's not about trying to stop you from joining Ferrari. You're a great driver and you deserve that chance. Then what is it about? It's about making sure you're prepared for what Ferrari really is. Not the dream they sell to the public, not the legend they've built up over the decades. The reality of what happens when money and politics matter more than talent and heart. Lewis felt a chill run down his spine. Marco, you're scaring me. Good. Marco said softly, you should be a little scared. Fear keeps you alert. It helps you see the truth instead of just what you want to see. After they hung up, Lewis sat in his studio for a long time, staring at the silent piano. He thought about calling his father or Anthony Davidson, asking for advice about whether meeting Marco was a good idea. But something in Marco's voice had convinced him. This wasn't about revenge or bitterness anymore. This was about truth. Lewis picked up his phone and dialed another number he knew by heart. Dad? Lewis? How are you, son? I need to ask you something. About that driver we talked about, Marco Santini. What about him? Do you remember anything specific about what happened to him at Ferrari? Anything that might explain why he's so angry? His father was quiet for a moment. Lewis could hear the television in the background. Probably a football match. I remember there were rumors, Anthony Hamilton said carefully, about sponsor pressure, about politics affecting driver selection. But Lewis, that was a different time. Ferrari was under enormous pressure to win, and they made decisions based on more than just speed. What kind of decisions? The kind that broke good people's hearts. Marco was one of the good ones. Lewis, he loved racing for the pure joy of it. When that gets taken away from someone, when they realize the sport isn't as fair as they thought it was, it changes them. Lewis thought about his own journey through racing. The barriers he'd faced because of his background, the doors that had been closed because of his skin color, the extra pressure to prove himself at every level. But he'd had his father's support, good people in his corner, and eventually the talent had won out. Marco apparently hadn't been so lucky. Dad, he wants to meet with me, to tell me what really happened. Are you sure that's wise? I told you, this man has been carrying a lot of anger for a very long time. I think I need to hear his story. If I'm gonna Ferrari, I should know what I'm walking into. His father sighed. Just be careful, son. And remember, whatever happened to Marco doesn't mean the same thing will happen to you. You're Lewis Hamilton. You've already proven yourself at the highest level. Marco never got that chance. After they hung up, Lewis walked through his house, past the trophies and photos from his career. 7 world championships, over 100 race wins, pole positions, podium finishes. Evidence of a career that had exceeded even his wildest childhood dreams. But looking at those trophies now, Lewis wondered about all the drivers who never got their chance. The Marco Santinis of the world, who had the talent but not the luck, not the right connections, not the right timing. He stopped in front of a photo from his first championship in 2008. He was spraying champagne, young and ecstatic and convinced that racing was the fairest sport in the world. If you were fast enough, you won. Simple as that. Now, 25 years into his career, Lewis knew it wasn't that simple. There were politics and money and 1,000 factors beyond pure speed that determined who succeeded and who got left behind. Marco Santini had been left behind. And tomorrow, Lewis would find out why. He picked up his phone and sent a text to Marco. Café de la Paz, Thursday at 10 a.m. I'll be there. The response came quickly. Thank you for listening. See you, Thursday. Lewis set the phone down and finally sat at the piano. His fingers found the keys automatically, playing a slow, sad melody that seemed to capture everything he was feeling. Hope and fear. Excitement and dread. The weight of dreams and the possibility that those dreams might come with a price he hadn't expected to pay. Outside his window, London hummed with evening traffic. But Lewis barely heard it. His mind was already in Milan, in a small cafe where he would finally learn the truth about what Ferrari had done to Marco Santini, and what it might do to him. The rain was falling steadily in Milan when Lewis arrived at Café de la Paz. He'd taken a commercial flight from London, keeping a low profile with sunglasses and a simple black jacket. The last thing he needed was photographers following him to this meeting. The cafe was exactly as Marco had described. Small, tucked away down a narrow street near the Duomo. The kind of place that served excellent coffee to locals who had been coming there for decades. Lewis pushed through the glass door, shaking raindrops from his jacket. Marco was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 espresso cups in front of him. He looked older than he had at Monza, more tired. His hair was grayer than Lewis remembered, and he wore a simple brown jacket that had seen better days. But his eyes were different. Less angry, more sad. Like he'd been carrying a heavy weight for so long that anger had turned into something deeper and more painful. Lewis. Marco stood up as Lewis approached. Thank you for coming. They shook hands. Marco's grip was firm but not aggressive. Up close, Lewis could see the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry invisible burdens. Thank you for calling, Lewis said, sitting across from Marco. I've been thinking about what you said at Monza. Marco pushed one of the espresso cups toward Lewis. I ordered for you. I hope that's okay. Lewis took a sip. The coffee was perfect, strong and bitter and exactly what he needed for this conversation. Marco, I need to understand what happened to you, Lewis said directly. Not just the basic facts, but the real story. The whole story. Marco nodded slowly. The whole story starts with love, he said quietly. And it ends with betrayal. But I suppose most stories like this do. He stared out the cafe window at the rain. In 1999, I was 27 years old. I'd been Ferrari's test driver for 2 years. And I was fast. Really fast. The engineers used to joke that I was quicker than Michael in some conditions. Lewis leaned forward. This was what he'd come to hear. But being fast wasn't enough, Marco continued. I was also in love. Completely stupidly, wonderfully in love with a woman named Isabella Rossi. The name hit Lewis like a punch. Rossi, one of Ferrari's major sponsors. Marco saw the recognition in Lewis's eyes. Yes, that Rossi. Giuseppe Rossi's daughter. He owned Rossi Automotive Parts, one of Ferrari's biggest sponsors then. And still today. Lewis felt his stomach drop. What was she like? Beautiful. Smart. Passionate about racing. Just like me. We met at a Ferrari event in 1998, and it was magic. Marco's voice softened with memory. She understood what racing meant to me. She loved watching me work with the car. Loved hearing me talk about setup changes and tire strategies. Marco smiled for the first time since Lewis had met him. We were going to be married. I'd bought a ring, was planning to propose after the 1999 season. I thought my life was perfect. What happened? The smile disappeared from Marco's face. Michael's accident at Silverstone happened. Broken leg, season over. Ferrari needed a replacement driver for the rest of the year. Marco's hands tightened around his coffee cup. I was ready. God, I was so ready. I'd been preparing for that moment my entire career. Every test session, every setup meeting, every late night working with the engineers. It had all been building to this. Lewis could hear the pain starting to creep back into Marco's voice. The team knew I was the fastest option. The data proved it. Lap after lap, day after day, I was quicker than anyone else they tested. The mechanics were excited. They'd been watching me for 2 years and knew what I could do. But Giuseppe Rossi had other plans. Marco's voice turned bitter. He didn't want his daughter marrying a racing driver from a working-class family. He wanted someone from his social circle, someone who could help expand his business connections. Lewis felt sick. He used his sponsor influence to block you? He didn't just block me, he destroyed me. Marco's eyes filled with tears, but his voice remained steady. Giuseppe went to Ferrari management and made it very simple. If they gave me the race seat, Rossi Automotive would end their sponsorship deal. Immediately, Lewis knew enough about F1 finances to understand what that meant. Losing a major sponsor mid-season could cripple a team, so they gave the seat to Mika Salo instead, Marco continued. A safe choice. Experienced, professional, no complicated family connections. No angry sponsors threatening to pull millions of dollars. That's horrible. But surely Isabella chose her father over me. Marco's voice cracked. The day after Ferrari announced Salo as Michael's replacement, she called me. She said she couldn't go against her family, couldn't risk her father's business, couldn't marry someone who would always be seen as a threat to their social status. Marco wiped his eyes with a napkin. She gave me back the engagement ring I hadn't even had a chance to give her properly. Said it was better this way, that we both needed to be realistic about our futures. Lewis sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just about a lost racing opportunity. This was about having your entire life ripped apart by people who saw you as nothing more than a business problem to solve. I stayed with Ferrari for 2 more years, Marco said. Kept hoping things would change, that maybe Giuseppe would retire, or Isabella would find the courage to stand up to him. But every time an opportunity came up, a test with another team, a chance at a race seat somewhere else, Giuseppe's influence followed me. How? He had connections everywhere. Other sponsors, team owners, people who owed him favors. A quiet word here, a business threat there. Suddenly I was difficult to work with, or not quite ready, or missing that extra something that made the difference between a test driver and a race driver. Marco's voice became barely above a whisper. By 2001, I realized the truth. I wasn't just losing my chance at F1. I was being systematically destroyed by a man who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his business plans. Lewis felt anger rising in his chest. That's not racing. That's not fair competition. No, it's not. But it's how the world works when you don't have money or power or the right family name. Marco looked directly at Lewis. You've been lucky, Lewis. You had talent, yes. But you also had people who believed in you, who fought for you, who opened doors instead of closing them. Lewis thought about his father's sacrifices, about Ron Dennis giving him a chance at McLaren, about all the people who had supported his career. I had advantages too, Lewis admitted, but I also faced barriers because of who I am. Yes, but you overcame them. You proved that talent could win out over prejudice. I never got that chance. Marco finished his espresso and set the cup down carefully. That's why I confronted you at Monza. Not because I hate you or begrudge your success, but because I wanted you to understand what Ferrari really is underneath all the glory and tradition. What do you mean? I mean, it's a place where dreams go to die if you don't have the right connections. Where politics and money matter more than lap times. Where good people get crushed by powerful people who see racing as nothing more than a business tool. Lewis felt like the world was shifting underneath him. Marco, do you think those same problems exist at Ferrari today? Marco was quiet for a long moment, staring at his empty coffee cup. I don't know, he said finally. The leadership has changed. The culture might be different. But Giuseppe Rossi is dead now, and his company is still a major Ferrari sponsor. Still wielding influence, still making demands. Who runs the company now? Marco's expression became complicated. sad and angry and something else Lewis couldn't identify. Isabella, he said quietly. Isabella runs Rossi Automotive now. She never married anyone else, never had children, just threw herself into business after her father died. Lewis felt another chill. Do you think she's still? I don't know what Isabella thinks about anything anymore. We haven't spoken in 25 years. Marco stood up slowly. But Lewis, I need you to understand something. The people who destroyed my career, who broke my heart, who took away everything I'd worked for, they're still there, still powerful, still making decisions that affect drivers' lives. Marco put on his jacket, preparing to leave. Ask yourself this: when Ferrari made you their promises about championships and legacy and making history, did they mention the price you might have to pay? Did they tell you about the compromises you might have to make? Lewis shook his head. Then you're walking into the same trap I did, Marco said sadly. Believing that being fast is enough, that merit matters more than politics, that dreams are stronger than money. Marco walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. Lewis, you're a good man. I can see that. Don't let them change you into someone you don't recognize. Don't let them take your soul along with your speed. And then he was gone, disappearing into the Milan rain, leaving Lewis alone with the weight of a story that changed everything he thought he knew about Ferrari. Lewis sat in the quiet cafe for another hour, staring at the rain and wondering if the red suit he dreamed of wearing his entire career might be stained with more than just victory champagne. It might be stained with broken dreams and broken hearts, including possibly his own. Lewis barely slept on the flight back to London. Marco's story played over and over in his mind like a song he couldn't turn off. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Marco's face as he talked about Isabella, the love and pain mixed together after all these years. By the time Lewis got home, he had made a decision. He needed to know more, not just about Marco's story, but about Ferrari itself, about the politics that still existed, the power structures that might affect his own future with the team. He started with phone calls. Stefano? It's Lewis Hamilton. Stefano Domenicali sounded surprised to hear from him. As the current CEO of Formula One, Stefano was always busy, but he'd known Lewis for years and had been Ferrari's team principal during some of their most successful seasons. Lewis, good to hear from you. Congratulations again on the Ferrari move. The fans are very excited. Thanks, Stefano. I actually wanted to ask you about something from Ferrari's history, from your time there. Of course. What can I help you with? Lewis chose his words carefully. I've been learning about the late 1990s when the team was under pressure to win championships. I heard there were sometimes political considerations in driver selections. There was a pause on Stefano's end. Lewis, why are you asking about this? I met someone who was affected by those decisions. I'm trying to understand how things worked back then. Stefano's voice became more careful. The late 90s were a complicated time for Ferrari. We were desperate to end our championship drought. And yes, sometimes decisions were made for reasons beyond pure performance. What kind of reasons? Sponsor relationships, commercial considerations, political pressures from within the company. Lewis, you have to understand, Ferrari isn't just a racing team. It's a business, a brand, a symbol of Italian pride. Sometimes those responsibilities conflicted with sporting decisions. Lewis felt his heart sink a little. Do those same pressures exist today? Every F1 team faces commercial pressures. Lewis. But the sport has changed, become more professional, more regulated. The kind of sponsor interference that might have happened 25 years ago would be much harder today. After they hung up, Lewis wasn't sure if he felt better or worse. Stefano had confirmed that political pressures existed, but suggested they were less powerful now. Maybe, probably, he hoped. Next, Lewis called Ross Brawn. Ross had been Ferrari's technical director during their golden years with Michael Schumacher and was known for his honest, direct approach to everything. Lewis, congratulations on Ferrari. It's a big move. Thanks, Ross. Can I ask you something about the old days at Ferrari? About how driver decisions were made? Ross laughed. Straight to the point. I like that. What do you want to know? Were there ever times when sponsors influenced who got race seats? Ah, you've been talking to someone, haven't you? Ross's voice became more serious. Yes, Lewis, there were times when commercial considerations affected sporting decisions. It wasn't unique to Ferrari. Most teams dealt with similar pressures. Can you give me an example? Ross was quiet for a moment. There was a test driver in the late 90s. Very talented young man. When Michael got injured, this driver should have been the obvious choice for the race seat. But there were complications. Lewis's pulse quickened. What kind of complications? Family complications, you might say. The driver was involved with someone whose family had business interests that conflicted with his career advancement. So Ross knew about Marco and Isabella. What happened to him? He never recovered from not getting that chance. It broke something in him. Lewis. F1 can be cruel to dreams. Not everyone who deserves a shot gets one. Do those same problems exist now? The sport has evolved, become more professional. But money still talks. Lewis. Sponsors still have influence. The difference is that top drivers like you have more power now, more ability to control your own destiny. After the call, Lewis sat in his home office staring at framed photos from his career. In one picture, he was celebrating his first win with Mercedes. In another, he was holding his first World Championship trophy. Evidence of dreams that had come true. But now he wondered about all the dreams that hadn't come true. All the Marco Santinis who had the talent but not the luck, not the right connections, not the right family background. Lewis opened his laptop and started researching Rossi Automotive. The company's website was professional and impressive. They supplied parts to several F1 teams, not just Ferrari. Their annual revenue was in the hundreds of millions. Isabella Rossi's biography on the company website was brief. Born in Milan, educated in business and engineering, took over the company after her father's death in 2015. There was a professional headshot. She was an attractive woman in her late 40s with dark hair and serious eyes. No mention of ever being married. No mention of children. Just business achievements and charity work. Lewis found himself staring at Isabella's photo, wondering what she was thinking when it was taken. Did she ever think about Marco? Did she regret the choice she'd made 25 years ago? His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Isabella Rossi. I believe you met with Marco Santini yesterday. We need to talk. Lewis stared at the message in shock. How had she gotten his number? How did she know about the meeting? He typed back. How did you know about the meeting? The response came quickly. Milan is smaller than you think, and I have many friends in the city. Can we meet tomorrow? I'm in London on business. Lewis hesitated. Meeting with Marco had been difficult enough. Meeting with the woman who had broken Marco's heart and helped destroy his career felt like stepping into even more dangerous territory. But he needed to understand the whole story. And Isabella was part of that story. Where? He typed. The Shard, level 31 restaurant, 2 p.m. Come alone. Lewis set the phone down and walked to his window. London stretched out below him. Millions of people living their lives, chasing their dreams. Some succeeding and others failing for reasons that had nothing to do with their talent or effort. Tomorrow he would meet the woman who had chosen family loyalty over love, business over dreams, safety over courage. The woman who now controlled one of Ferrari's most important sponsor relationships. The woman who might hold the key to understanding whether his own Ferrari dreams were built on solid ground or shifting sand. Lewis picked up his phone and called his father. Dad, I need to tell you about something that happened in Milan. I'm listening, son. Lewis told him about Marco's story, about Isabella's role in destroying Marco's career, about the text message he'd just received. Lewis, are you sure meeting with this woman is wise? She sounds like she could be dangerous to your career. I think she might be the only person who can tell me the truth about Ferrari, about whether I'm making the right choice. His father was quiet for a long time. Son, sometimes the truth is harder to live with than uncertainty. But at least it's the truth. Just promise me you'll be careful. And remember, whatever happened 25 years ago doesn't have to determine what happens to you now. After they hung up, Lewis sat at his piano and played quietly, letting his fingers find melodies that matched his complicated feelings. Hope and fear, excitement and dread, all mixed together like ingredients in a recipe he didn't understand. Tomorrow, he would meet Isabella Rossi and learn more about the forces that had shaped Marco's fate. Forces that might be shaping his own fate too, whether he realized it or not. The music flowed from his fingers. beautiful and sad and uncertain, like everything else in his life right now. Outside his window, London hummed with evening traffic and human dreams, some fulfilled and others forever broken, just like the dreams that would be discussed tomorrow. 31 floors above the city, between a 7-time world champion and the woman who had helped destroy another driver's hopes a lifetime ago. The view from level 31 of the Shard was breathtaking, London spread out below like a map, Thames winding through the city like a silver ribbon. Lewis arrived 5 minutes early and chose a corner table where they could speak privately. Isabella Rossi was already there. She sat with her back to the window, wearing a navy blue business suit that looked expensive but not flashy. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore minimal jewelry, just a watch and small earrings. She looked professional, successful, and deeply sad. Lewis recognized her immediately from the photos on her company website, but seeing her in person was different. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of years of difficult decisions. Her hands folded on the table showed she was nervous despite her calm appearance. "Mr. Hamilton," she said as he approached. "Thank you for coming." Her English was perfect, with just a hint of Italian accent. Her voice was quiet, controlled, like someone who had learned not to reveal too much emotion. "Ms. Rossi," Lewis replied, sitting across from her. "I have to admit, I'm not sure why we're meeting." Isabella smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because you met with Marco yesterday, and now you have questions about Ferrari that no one else can answer." A waiter approached, but Isabella waved him away politely. This wasn't a social lunch. This was something else entirely. "How do you know I met with Marco?" Lewis asked directly. "Milan is my city, Mr. Hamilton. I have friends everywhere, in restaurants, hotels, cafes. When someone as famous as you meets with someone as memorable as Marco Santini, word gets around." Lewis studied her face. "You've been keeping track of him." "For 25 years, she admitted without hesitation. "I know where he lives, where he works, how he's doing. I know about his struggles with depression, his financial problems, his failed attempts to return to racing." "Why?" Isabella's composure cracked slightly. "Because I destroyed his life, Mr. Hamilton. And when you destroy someone's life, you carry the responsibility for knowing what happens to them afterward." Lewis felt a chill. This was not what he had expected. "You destroyed his life?" "My father destroyed his career. But I destroyed his heart, his faith and love, his belief that good things could happen to good people." Isabella's voice became quieter. "I chose my family's business over the man I loved. I chose security over courage. I chose wrong." Lewis leaned forward. "Tell me what really happened." Isabella looked out the window at the London skyline, gathering her thoughts. "Marco was the most wonderful man I had ever met. Kind, passionate, honest to a fault. When he talked about racing, his whole face would light up. He made me believe in dreams." She turned back to Lewis. "My father saw Marco as a threat to his business plans, not because Marco wasn't good enough, but because he was too good, too honest, too pure. My father needed people he could control, and Marco couldn't be controlled. So your father blocked Marco's promotion to the race seat. It was worse than that. My father made sure Marco would never get a chance anywhere in Formula One. He had connections with sponsors throughout the sport. A word here, a favor there, and suddenly doors that should have opened for Marco stayed closed." Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "But the worst part was what I did. When my father threatened to disown me, to destroy our family business, to ruin everything our family had built over generations, I gave in. I chose the easy path. You ended your engagement to Marco. I broke his heart." Isabella's voice cracked. "I saw the look in his eyes when I gave him back the ring he hadn't even had a chance to properly give me. It was like watching someone's soul break in real time." Lewis felt sick to his stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're about to join Ferrari, and I need you to understand what that really means. Not the glamorous version they show the public, but the reality of how power and money work in that world." Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo. It showed her and Marco at what looked like a Ferrari event in 1998. They were both young, both smiling, both looking completely happy. Marco had his arm around Isabella's shoulders, and she was looking at him like he was the most important person in the world. I kept this, she said softly. The only photo I have of us together. My husband found it once and wanted to know who the man was. I told him it was no one important. You got married? To a man my father chose for me. Alberto Conti, heir to another automotive parts company. It expanded my father's business empire and satisfied his social ambitions. Isabella's voice became bitter. It was everything my father wanted and nothing I want. Was it a good marriage? Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in it. Alberto was a good man, but we both knew why we were married. For business, not for love. We tried to make it work for 15 years, but you can't build a life on the foundation of someone else's dreams. You divorced? 5 years ago, Alberto finally admitted he'd fallen in love with someone else, someone he'd chosen for himself, not someone chosen for him by business arrangements. Louis looked at the photo again. Marco and Isabella looked so young, so hopeful. Do you have children? No. The word came out like a confession. I kept thinking I would have children when I was ready, when I felt like my life was real instead of just an act I was performing for my father. But the years passed, and I never felt ready. I never felt like my life was truly mine. Isabella took the photo back and looked at it for a long moment. Do you know what the worst part is, Mr. Hamilton? Louis shook his head. I never stopped loving him. Not for a single day in 25 years. I married another man, built a business empire, became everything my father wanted me to become. But every night when I went to bed, I thought about Marco, about what our life could have been like if I had been brave enough to choose love over fear. Louis felt tears in his own eyes. Isabella, why are you telling me this? Because my father is dead now and I run Rossi Automotive. And because I've been watching your career, Mr. Hamilton. You've always fought for what's right. Always stood up for people who don't have power. You've used your success to make the world better. Isabella leaned forward. I want to help you avoid the mistakes Marco made. But more than that, I want to make things right with Marco himself. What do you mean? I've been supporting him financially for years, sending money through a charity foundation so he wouldn't know it came from me. Paying for his therapy, his living expenses, making sure he has what he needs. Louis was stunned. He doesn't know? He can never know. His pride wouldn't let him accept help from me, not after what I did to him. Isabella's voice became stronger. But Mr. Hamilton, I want to do more. I want to apologize to him properly. I want to tell him the truth about how I've lived with this guilt for 25 years. Why haven't you contacted him directly? Isabella looked down at her hands. Because I'm afraid. I destroyed his life once already. What if trying to apologize just makes things worse? What if seeing me brings back all the pain I caused? Louis thought about Marco's face in the Milan cafe, the way his voice had broken when he talked about Isabella. Isabella, can I ask you something? Of course. When you took over your father's company, did you change how it does business? Do you still use sponsor influence to affect racing decisions? Isabella met his eyes directly. No. I ended those practices immediately after my father died. Rossi Automotive supports racing teams based on business merit, not personal politics. I swore I would never let the company destroy another person's dreams the way it destroyed Marco's. Louis felt a small sense of relief. So Ferrari drivers today don't have to worry about the same kind of interference? Not from my company. But Mr. Hamilton, there are other sponsors, other sources of pressure. The politics have changed, but they haven't disappeared entirely. Isabella stood up, preparing to leave. I have a request. Will you give Marco a message from me? What kind of message? Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I was wrong to choose my father over him. Tell him that if he's willing, I would like to meet with him and apologize properly for what I took away from both of us. Louis stood as well. Isabella, what if he says no? Then at least I will have tried. At least I will have admitted the truth after all these years of living with lies. She handed Louis a business card with her personal phone number written on the back. If he agrees to meet, call me. I'll come anywhere, anytime. I owe him that much. As Isabella walked toward the elevator, Louis called after her. Isabella? She turned back. Do you think Marco can forgive you? Her smile was sad but genuine. I don't know, but I hope so. Because forgiveness might be the only thing that can heal what we broke all those years ago. Lewis watched her leave, then sat back down and stared out at the London skyline. He was holding Isabella's business card, but more than that, he was holding two people's hopes for redemption. The question now was whether Marco was ready to hear from the woman who had broken his heart 25 years ago. Whether some wounds could heal, or if some choices were too final to ever be undone. 2 weeks later, Lewis found himself back in Italy, but this time for a very different reason. Ferrari had invited him to Maranello for his first official visit as their future driver. The media attention was intense. Every major racing publication wanted photos of Lewis Hamilton in Ferrari red. But Lewis's mind wasn't on photo shoots or press conferences. Isabella's business card was still in his wallet, and her request weighed heavily on his thoughts. He hadn't contacted Marco yet. How do you tell someone that the woman who broke their heart wants to apologize after 25 years? The drive from Milan to Maranello took Lewis through the Italian countryside he was beginning to love. Rolling hills, small villages, vineyards stretching toward distant mountains. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely different from the chaos in his mind. Ferrari's headquarters in Maranello was exactly as Lewis had imagined. Part factory, part museum, part temple to racing history. Red cars gleamed under perfect lighting, trophies filled countless display cases, and photos of legendary drivers lined the walls. Fred Vasseur, Ferrari's team principal, greeted Lewis with genuine warmth. Fred was a calm, intelligent man who had built his reputation on developing young talent and creating winning teams. "Lewis, welcome home," Fred said, extending his hand. Home. The word felt both right and strange. Lewis had dreamed of joining Ferrari for years, but now that it was happening, everything felt more complicated than he'd expected. The factory tour was impressive. Lewis met engineers who had worked on championship-winning cars, mechanics who had celebrated victories with legendary drivers, designers who were already planning next year's car with Lewis in mind. But throughout the tour, Lewis found himself thinking about Marco Santini. How many times had Marco walked these same halls dreaming of his chance to race for Ferrari? How many times had he stood in this same factory, believing his talent would eventually be rewarded? "Lewis, you seem distracted," Fred observed as they sat in his office after the tour. "Is everything okay?" Lewis hesitated. He liked Fred and trusted his judgment, but how much should he share about his conversations with Marco and Isabella? "Fred, can I ask you something about Ferrari's history? About how driver decisions were made in the past?" Fred's expression became more serious. "What specifically do you want to know?" "I've heard that sponsor relationships sometimes influenced who got race seats. Is that still true today?" Fred was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Lewis, I won't lie to you. In the past, Ferrari sometimes made decisions based on factors beyond pure performance. Commercial considerations, political pressures, they existed. Do they still exist? Every Formula One team has to balance sporting goals with business realities. But the way I operate, the way this team operates now, driver selection is based on one thing. Who gives us the best chance to win races and championships?" Fred leaned forward. "Lewis, why are you asking these questions? Has someone suggested that your signing was influenced by anything other than your talent and experience?" "No, nothing like that." Lewis paused. "I met someone recently who had a difficult experience with Ferrari in the past. It made me think about how the sport really works behind the scenes. The late 1990s were a complicated time for this team," Fred said. "We were desperate to end our championship drought, and yes, sometimes that desperation led to decisions that weren't purely sporting. But Lewis, that was a different era, with different leadership." Fred stood and walked to his window, which looked out over the Ferrari test track. "I've been in this sport for 30 years. I've seen how politics and money can destroy talented people. That's exactly why I've built this team to operate differently." "How so?" "By being transparent with our drivers, by making decisions based on data and performance, by treating everyone with respect regardless of their background or connections." Fred turned back to Lewis. "That's what attracted me to Ferrari's current vision, and it's what should give you confidence about your future here." After the meeting, Lewis drove to the small town where Marco taught driving lessons. He'd looked up the address online and decided it was time to have another conversation. The driving school was in a simple building on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy but clean and professional. Louis parked across the street and watched through the window as Marco worked with a teenage student, patiently explaining something about cornering technique. Watching Marco teach, Louis saw a different side of him. The anger and bitterness from their previous meetings were gone, replaced by genuine enthusiasm for helping young drivers improve. Marco's face lit up when his student successfully executed a difficult maneuver, and Louis could see why people said he'd been such a promising driver. The passion was still there, just redirected. When the lesson ended, Louis crossed the street and knocked on the door. Marco looked surprised but not unwelcome to see him. "Louis? What are you doing here?" "I was at Ferrari today. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." Marco invited him in. The office was small but organized, with photos of students who had gone on to racing success and certificates showing Marco's qualifications as an instructor. "How was your visit to Maranello?" Marco asked. "Good. Impressive. Fred Vasseur seems like a good man." "He is. Very different from the leadership Ferrari had when I was there." Marco's voice was neutral, not bitter. "I'm glad they found someone like him." Louis took a deep breath. "Marco, I need to tell you about something that happened after our meeting in Milan." Marco's expression became cautious. "What kind of something?" "Isabella contacted me. She wanted to meet to talk about what happened between you two." The change in Marco was immediate. His face went pale, and he had to sit down in his chair. "She what?" "She asked me to give you a message. She wants to apologize, Marco. She wants to meet with you and explain what really happened, why she made the choices she did." Marco stared at Louis in shock. "After 25 years, she wants to talk?" Louis nodded. "She told me she's been following your life from a distance. She knows about your struggles, your work here. She feels terrible about what happened." Marco was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What did she say?" Louis chose his words carefully. "She said she was wrong to choose her family's business over you. She said she's carried the guilt every day since she never had children. Her marriage ended in divorce. And she spent 25 years wondering what life would have been like if she'd been brave enough to choose differently." Tears formed in Marco's eyes. "She really said that?" "She did. Marco, I think she's genuinely sorry. I think she wants to try to make things right." Marco stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. "Louis, you don't understand what it was like. The day she broke our engagement, she didn't just end our relationship. She destroyed my faith in everything good I believed about the world. I can't imagine how painful that was. I loved her completely. I thought she loved me the same way. When she chose her father's money over our future together, it made me question everything. My judgment, my worth as a person, my ability to trust anyone ever again." Marco turned back to Louis. "Do you know I never had another serious relationship after Isabella? Never fell in love again, never married, never had children, because I was terrified of being hurt like that again." Louis felt his heart break for Marco. "But don't you think there's a chance for healing? For both of you?" Marco was quiet for another long moment. "What exactly is she asking for?" "Just to meet to apologize properly. To try to find some peace for both of you after all these years." Marco sat back down and looked at a photo on his desk. A group shot of his current driving students, all smiling after a successful day of lessons. "These kids," he said softly. "They look at me like I know everything about racing, about life. But the truth is, I've been stuck in 1999 for 25 years. Angry, bitter, unable to move forward." He picked up the photo. Maybe it's time to try something different." Louis waited, not wanting to pressure Marco but hoping he would find the courage to face his past. "Tell her I'll meet with her," Marco said finally. "But not in Milan. Too many memories there. And not alone. I want you there as a witness to whatever she has to say." "Are you sure?" Marco looked at Louis with eyes that held both fear and hope. "No, I'm not sure about anything, but Louis, you helped me realize something today. I can't spend the rest of my life being angry about what was taken from me. Maybe it's time to find out if anything can be given back." Louis felt a surge of emotion. "Marco, that's incredibly brave. Or incredibly stupid," Marco said with a sad smile. "But after 25 years of being stuck in the past, maybe it's time to take a risk on the future." As Louis drove away from Marco's driving school, he felt like something important had shifted. Two people who had been carrying pain for decades were finally ready to face each other. Whether that meeting would bring healing or more heartbreak remained to be seen. But for the first time since this whole story began, Lewis felt hopeful that some wounds really could heal, even the deepest ones. Given enough courage and enough time, Lewis called Isabella that evening from his hotel room in Medina. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by her phone. "Isabella, it's Lewis Hamilton." I spoke with Marco. There was silence on the other end for several seconds. Then very quietly, "What did he say?" "He agreed to meet with you." Isabella's intake of breath was audible. He really said yes?" "Yes, but with conditions. He wants me there as a neutral party, and he wants to meet somewhere away from Milan. Too many memories there." "Of course. Anywhere he wants." "When?" Lewis could hear the emotion in her voice, hope mixed with fear. "He needs a few days to prepare himself. Maybe this weekend? I can arrange something." "Lewis, Isabella's voice broke. "I can't believe he's willing to see me, after everything I did to him." "Isabella, he's been carrying this pain for 25 years, just like you have. Maybe you both need this conversation." After they hung up, Lewis sat by his hotel window, looking out at the Italian countryside. Tomorrow he would drive back to London, but part of him would stay here in Italy, connected now to this story of broken dreams and lost love. But first he had one more stop to make. The next morning Lewis drove to Marco's apartment. It was in a modest building on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where working people lived quiet lives. Marco had given him the address reluctantly, apologizing for not having somewhere more impressive to show a 7-time world champion. Marco's apartment was small but neat. The most striking thing was how much Ferrari memorabilia filled the space. Photos from his test driving days, a framed Ferrari test suit, scale models of cars he'd worked on. It was like a museum of dreams that never came true. "I never could bring myself to throw any of it away," Marco said, noticing Lewis looking around. "People think I keep it because I'm bitter. But the truth is, I keep it because those were the happiest days of my life." Marco picked up a photo from his coffee table. It showed him standing next to Michael Schumacher after a test session, both men smiling broadly. "Michael was incredibly kind to me," Marco said. "He saw my potential and wasn't threatened by it. When he got injured at Silverstone, he actually recommended me for the race seat." Lewis studied the photo. "What happened then?" "Michael fought for me as much as he could. But even Michael Schumacher couldn't overcome the politics when Giuseppe Rossi made his demands." Marco set the photo down carefully. "Michael apologized to me personally when Salo was announced. Said he was sorry the sport wasn't more fair." Marco walked to a drawer and pulled out a folder filled with papers. "These are all the lap times from 1999. Every test session, every comparison with the race drivers. The data doesn't lie, Lewis. I was faster than anyone they had." Lewis looked through the timing sheets. The numbers told a clear story. Marco Santini had consistently been the quickest driver in Ferrari testing throughout. "Why do you keep these?" "To remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That I really was good enough. When you get rejected for reasons that have nothing to do with your ability, you start to doubt everything about yourself." Marco closed the folder. "Lewis, there's something I need you to understand about Ferrari. About what it really means to put on that red suit." Lewis sat down in Marco's small living room, surrounded by the artifacts of unfulfilled dreams. "Ferrari isn't just a racing team," Marco continued. "It's a symbol, a dream, a promise that if you're talented enough and dedicated enough, you can become part of something legendary." Marco's voice became softer. "When I first put on Ferrari gear for a test session in 1997, I felt like I was connecting with every great driver who had ever worn red. Ascari, Lauda, Villeneuve, Prost. I felt like I was carrying their legacy forward. That's exactly how I imagine it will feel. But Lewis, that legacy comes with a price. Ferrari demands everything from you, your talent, your dedication, your heart, your soul. And sometimes, when you've given everything you have, they take it and give you nothing back." Marco walked to his window and looked out at the quiet street. The people at Ferrari, the mechanics, the engineers, the people who actually build and race the cars, they're good people. They love racing for the right reasons. They became my friends, my family. What about the leadership? The decision makers? That's more complicated. Some were good, some were political, some were just trying to survive in a world where winning was everything. Marco turned back to Lewis. But the real power at Ferrari doesn't always come from within the team. What do you mean? I mean the sponsors, the board members, the business interests that provide the money to keep Ferrari running. Those people care about racing, yes, but they care more about their investments, their social status, their business relationships. Marco sat down across from Lewis. Giuseppe Rossi was one of those people. He saw Ferrari as a tool to expand his business empire and his social influence. When I threatened that by falling in love with his daughter, he used his power to eliminate the threat. Lewis felt a chill. Do those same power structures still exist? Different people, same systems. Money still talks. Lewis, sponsors still have influence. The difference is that someone like you, a 7-time world champion, a global superstar, has more power to resist pressure than a young test driver ever could. Marco leaned forward. But Lewis, promise me something. When you put on that Ferrari suit, when you feel the weight of all that history and tradition, remember that there are drivers like me who never got the chance. Carry our dreams with you, but don't let our failures become your limitations. Lewis felt emotion rising in his chest. Marco, that's exactly what I want to do. Then you'll be a different kind of Ferrari driver. Not just someone who wears the red suit, but someone who understands what it really costs and what it really means. Marco stood and walked to a closet, pulling out something wrapped in plastic. It was his Ferrari test suit from 1999, pristine and carefully preserved. I've kept this for 25 years, Marco said quietly. Sometimes I look at it and remember how proud I felt wearing Ferrari colors. Other times I look at it and remember how much it hurt to take it off for the last time. He held the suit out to Lewis. I want you to have this. Lewis was stunned. Marco, I can't take this. This is part of your history. It's part of my past, Lewis. But maybe it can be part of your future. Maybe this suit can finally race for Ferrari, even if I never could. Lewis took the suit with reverent hands. It felt heavier than he expected, weighted with dreams and disappointments and hopes that had never been fulfilled. Marco, this is incredible. But are you sure? I'm sure. When you put on your official Ferrari suit for the first time, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what it means to the people who never got their chance. Marco walked to another drawer and pulled out a letter, yellowed with age. There's something else I want to show you. Something I've never shown anyone. He handed Lewis the letter. It was written in Italian, but Lewis could see it was from Ferrari management, dated August 9. What does it say? It's my termination letter. Not from my job. They kept me on as a test driver for 2 more years. But termination of my dream. It says that due to changing team requirements and strategic considerations, I would not be considered for race seats in the future. Marco's voice became bitter. Strategic considerations. That's corporate language for a powerful sponsor doesn't want you to succeed. Lewis felt anger building in his chest. That's not right. That's not racing. No, it's not. But it's business. And sometimes Lewis business wins over racing. Marco took the letter back and put it away. But you know what I learned from all this? The sport didn't break me. The politics broke me. The racing itself, the pure joy of driving fast cars and competing with the best drivers in the world, that can never be taken away. Is that why you became a driving instructor? It's why I stayed connected to racing at all. These young drivers I teach, they remind me why I fell in love with motorsport in the first place. Speed, skill, the pursuit of perfection. That's what matters. Marco smiled for the first time since Lewis had arrived. And maybe, when I watch you race for Ferrari next year, I'll remember that the dream is bigger than any one person's disappointment. Lewis stood, still holding Marco's test suit. Marco, meeting with Isabella, are you really ready for that? Marco's expression became serious again. I don't know if anyone is ever ready to face the person who broke their heart. But Lewis, I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of carrying this pain around like a stone. Maybe it's time to see if forgiveness is possible. And if it's not, then at least I'll know I tried. And maybe that's enough. As Lewis prepared to leave, Marco walked him to the door. Lewis, when you become a Ferrari driver, you'll join a very exclusive club. Champions, legends, icons. But remember, You'll also be representing all the drivers who never got that chance. Make it count. Louis shook Marco's hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Tomorrow he would fly back to London, with Marco's test suit and the knowledge that his Ferrari dream was built on the broken dreams of others. But maybe that made it more meaningful, not less. Maybe carrying the dreams of drivers like Marco Santini was exactly what being a Ferrari driver should mean. Louis chose a small hotel in Como for the meeting. The town was beautiful and neutral, far enough from Milan to avoid painful memories, but close enough for both Marco and Isabella to travel there easily. The hotel had a quiet terrace overlooking Lake Como, perfect for a private conversation that had been 25 years in the making. Louis arrived early on Saturday morning and secured a corner table on the terrace. The lake sparkled in the morning sunshine, peaceful and timeless. It seemed like the right place for people to try to heal old wounds. Isabella arrived first, exactly on time. She looked nervous but determined, wearing a simple black dress and carrying a small leather bag. Her hands shook slightly as she sat down across from Louis. "Is he coming?" she asked quietly. "He said he would be here." "Marco keeps his promises." Isabella nodded, staring out at the lake. "I haven't slept in 3 days. I keep thinking about what I'm going to say to him. How I can possibly explain 25 years of regret in one conversation. Maybe you don't have to explain everything at once. Maybe you just start with the truth." 10 minutes later, Louis saw Marco walking across the hotel lobby. He moved slowly, like someone preparing for the most difficult conversation of his life. He wore a simple white shirt and dark pants, and carried himself with quiet dignity. Isabella saw him coming and her breath caught. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He looks so much older." "So do you," Louis said gently. "You both do. That's what 25 years does to people." Marco stepped onto the terrace and stopped when he saw Isabella. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other across the space and time that had separated them for so long. Isabella stood up slowly. "Hello, Marco." "Isabella." His voice was careful, controlled. Louis watched as they sat down at the table. Isabella and Marco on opposite sides, Louis between them like a referee in a boxing match that might end in healing instead of more hurt. For the first few minutes, nobody spoke. The silence was heavy, but not angry. It felt like the silence of people who had too much to say and didn't know where to start. Finally, Isabella broke the quiet. "Marco, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the excuses I gave you 25 years ago." Marco nodded, but didn't speak. Isabella's voice became stronger. "I was wrong to end our engagement. I was wrong to choose my father's business over our love. I was wrong to be too weak to fight for what we had." "Why?" Marco asked simply. Isabella looked down at her hands. "Because I was scared. Scared of losing my family. Scared of being cut off from everything I'd known my whole life. Scared of the unknown future we would have built together. So you chose the safe path. I chose the coward's path." Isabella's voice cracked. "And I've regretted it every single day since then." Marco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was sad but not angry. "Do you know what hurt the most, Isabella? It wasn't losing the Ferrari seat. It wasn't having my racing career destroyed. It was losing faith in love itself." Isabella started crying quietly. "I'm so sorry. After you left me, I never trusted anyone completely again. I never let myself fall in love again. I never married, never had children, never built the family we talked about building together." Louis felt his own eyes filling with tears watching these two broken people finally telling each other the truth. "I never married for love either," Isabella said. "I married Alberto because my father approved of him, because it made business sense, but I never loved him the way I loved you. Did you ever think about me?" Isabella laughed, but it was full of pain. "Every day, Marco, every single day, I kept one photo of us together, hidden in my office desk. Sometimes I would look at it and remember what happiness felt like." Marco reached into his wallet and pulled out a small photo. It was the same picture Isabella had shown Louis. The two of them at a Ferrari event in 1998. Young and in love and completely unaware of what was coming. "I kept the same photo," Marco said quietly. They both stared at their identical photos, 25 years of separation suddenly feeling both endless and meaningless. "Marco," Isabella said, "I need to tell you something else. something I've never told anyone. Marco looked up from the photo. I've been helping you, financially, for years. Marco's expression changed from sad to confused. What do you mean? The therapy bills that were mysteriously paid. The anonymous donations to your driving school. The rent assistance that came through a charity foundation. That was me. Marco stared at her in shock. You've been, all this time. I couldn't give you back your racing career, but I could at least make sure you had what you needed to survive. It was the least I could do after destroying your life. Marco was quiet for a very long time. Louis could see him processing this information, trying to understand what it meant. Why didn't you tell me? Marco finally asked. Because you never would have accepted help from me. Your pride is too strong. But Marco, I needed to do something. I couldn't just go on living my comfortable life knowing you were struggling because of choices I made. Marco put his head in his hands. Isabella, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I didn't tell you to make you feel grateful or obligated. I told you because you deserve to know the truth. Louis watched as something shifted between them. The anger that had defined their separation for 25 years was dissolving, replaced by something more complex. Grief for what they'd lost, but also a strange kind of relief that they were finally being honest with each other. Isabella, Marco said, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if you had chosen differently? Isabella's smile was heartbreaking. Every day, I imagine the house we would have bought, the children we would have raised, the races you would have won. I imagine growing old together instead of growing old apart. I imagine the same things. They sat in silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy with unspoken words. It was the silence of people who had finally said what needed to be said. Marco, Isabella said eventually, I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness. I know saying sorry doesn't undo 25 years of pain. But is there any chance, any possibility that we could find some peace with each other? Marco looked out at Lake Como, its surface calm and reflecting the afternoon sky. Isabella, I've been angry for so long that I forgot anger was a choice. I forgot that I could choose something else. He turned back to her. I don't know if I can forgive everything, but I know I'm tired of carrying this hate around. It's been poisoning my life for 25 years. What does that mean? It means I'm willing to try. Not to go back. We can't do that. Too much time has passed. Too much has changed. But maybe we can find a way forward that doesn't involve so much pain. Isabella reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of Marco's. May I? Marco nodded, and Isabella gently took his hand. It was the first time they had touched in 25 years. Marco, I want you to know something. Ending our engagement was the worst decision I ever made. Not because of what it cost me, but because of what it cost you. You deserved so much better than what life gave you. We both deserved better, Marco said simply. Louis felt like he was witnessing something sacred. Two people who had been broken by their choices finally finding a way to heal. It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation of a movie. It was quieter, more real, more complicated, but it was healing. What happens now? Isabella asked. Marco was quiet for a moment. I don't know, we're different people than we were 25 years ago. We've lived different lives, made different choices, become different versions of ourselves. But maybe we can be friends. Maybe we can find a way to care about each other again without trying to recapture something that's gone forever. Isabella squeezed his hand gently. I would like that very much. As the afternoon sun began to set over Lake Como, Louis watched two people who had spent 25 years apart begin the slow process of finding their way back to peace. Not to love. That was gone, buried under years of hurt and different lives, but to something that might be even more precious. Forgiveness. An understanding that sometimes healing doesn't mean going back. Sometimes it means finally being able to move forward. 6 months later, Louis stood in the Ferrari driver's room at Maranello, holding Marco's 1999 test suit in his hands. Outside, he could hear the roar of engines as his new Ferrari was prepared for his first official test as a member of the team. The suit felt different now than it had in Marco's apartment. Then it had felt heavy with disappointment and broken dreams. Now, it felt like a bridge between the past and the future, between what had been lost and what might still be possible. Lewis carefully hung Marco's suit in his locker, next to his own brand-new Ferrari race suit. The red fabric seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, and Lewis could almost feel the weight of history and expectation that came with wearing Ferrari colors. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Lewis, ready for your first drive?" It was Fred Vasseur, looking excited but trying to stay professional. Behind him stood several Ferrari engineers and mechanics, all eager to see their new driver in action. "Ready," Lewis said, but his voice came out quieter than he intended. As Lewis walked through the Ferrari factory toward the test track, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. The confrontation with Marco at Monza felt like it had happened in another lifetime. The angry, bitter man who had warned him about Ferrari's dark secrets had transformed into someone Lewis now considered a friend. The healing process between Marco and Isabella had been slow but genuine. They met for coffee once a month now, two middle-aged people learning how to care about each other again without the desperate intensity of their younger selves. Isabella had even visited Marco's driving school, watching quietly as he worked with his students. "He's a good teacher," she had told Lewis afterward. "Patient, encouraging. He helps these kids believe in their dreams, even though his own dream was broken." Now, as Lewis approached his Ferrari for the first time, he carried not just his own hopes, but the dreams of every driver who had never gotten this chance. The car was beautiful, sleek red curves that seemed to promise speed and victory. Lewis ran his hand along the smooth bodywork, feeling the same sense of awe he'd experienced as a child seeing his first Formula One car. "She's gorgeous, isn't she?" said Marco Bianchi, Lewis's new race engineer. "We've been working on this car for months, thinking about what you'll need to compete for championships." Lewis climbed into the cockpit and immediately felt at home. The steering wheel fit perfectly in his hands, the seat molded to his body like it had been made specifically for him. All around him, Ferrari red surrounded him like an embrace. "Radio check, Lewis," came Marco Bianchi's voice through his helmet speakers. "I can hear you clearly," Lewis replied. "How are the engine temperatures looking?" "All green. Take her out when you're ready." Lewis pressed the starter button and felt the Ferrari V6 hybrid engine roar to life behind him. The sound was different from his Mercedes engines, deeper, more emotional, like the car was singing the anthem of Italian racing passion. As Lewis pulled out of the pits for his first lap as a Ferrari driver, he thought about a phone call he'd received the night before. "Lewis, it's Marco. I wanted you to know that I'll be watching tomorrow. Isabella and I will be watching together, actually. How are things between you two?" "Different than they were, but better. We're learning how to be friends, how to support each other without trying to recapture what we lost." Marco had paused. "Lewis, when you drive that Ferrari tomorrow, remember that you're not just driving for yourself. You're driving for everyone who loves this sport, everyone who dreams of what you're about to experience." Now, as Lewis accelerated down the main straight at Maranello, he understood what Marco had meant. This wasn't just about Lewis Hamilton joining Ferrari. This was about dreams themselves, how they could be broken, how they could be transformed, how they could be passed from one generation to another. The car felt incredible, responsive, powerful, alive. Lewis pushed harder through the corners, feeling the Ferrari respond to his inputs like a thoroughbred horse responding to an experienced rider. The lap times were immediately competitive. But more than that, the car felt like it wanted to be driven fast. "Fantastic lap, Lewis." Marco Bianchi's voice crackled through the radio. "The car seems to suit your driving style perfectly." Lewis completed 20 laps, each one faster than the last. When he finally returned to the pits, a small crowd of Ferrari employees had gathered to watch. They applauded as he climbed out of the car, their faces bright with excitement and hope. Fred Vasseur approached with a huge smile. "Lewis, how did it feel?" "Like coming home," Lewis said honestly. "Like this is where I was meant to be." Later that evening, Lewis sat in his hotel room and called Marco Santini. "How was it?" Marco asked immediately. "Perfect. Better than I dreamed." "Marco, I understand now why you loved Ferrari so much. The car, the people, the history, it's all incredible. I'm so happy for you, Lewis. This is what should have happened 25 years ago. A talented driver getting the chance to show what he can do in a Ferrari." Lewis took a deep breath. "Marco, I want to ask you something. I'm planning to start a foundation to help young drivers from working-class backgrounds. Drivers who might face the same barriers you faced. Would you let me name it after you?" There was silence on the other end of the line. When Marco finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Lewis, you don't need to do that for me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for all the talented drivers who might never get their chance because they don't have the right connections or the right family background." Lewis paused. "I want to call it the Marco Santini Foundation for Racing Excellence. We'll provide scholarships, mentorship, and support for young drivers who need help navigating the political side of motorsport." Marco was quiet for so long that Lewis wondered if the call had been dropped. "Marco, are you there?" "I'm here," Marco said softly. "Lewis, that's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever offered to do for me. But are you sure? My name isn't exactly famous in racing circles. It will be. And Marco, there's something else. Something I found out recently that you should know." "What?" Lewis took another deep breath. This was the moment he'd been both anticipating and dreading. "Marco, do you remember writing fan letters when you were young? To drivers you admired?" Of course, every young racing fan writes letters to their heroes. Well, sometimes those heroes write back. And sometimes, those letters save lives. Lewis could hear Marco's breathing change on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about, Lewis? In 1999, when everything fell apart for you, when you lost the Ferrari seat and Isabella left you, do you remember what you were thinking? How dark things got?" The silence stretched between them like a bridge. Neither wanted to cross. "Marco, I know about the night you almost gave up. The night you thought about ending everything. How could you possibly know about that?" "I never told anyone. Because you kept something that stopped you. A letter from a 14-year-old British karting driver who wrote to tell you that you were his hero. A kid who said that watching you test for Ferrari made him believe that dreams could come true." Lewis heard Marco's sharp intake of breath. "That letter was from me, Marco. I wrote to you in 1999 because I was a young driver dreaming of Formula One, and you represented everything I hoped to achieve. You kept that letter, and it helped you choose to keep living." The silence on the phone was complete now. Lewis could almost feel Marco processing this revelation, understanding that their connection went back much further than their meeting at Monza. "You?" Marco's voice was barely a whisper. "You were the boy who wrote to me?" "I was. And Marco, you saved my dreams by staying alive long enough for our paths to cross again. If you had given up in 1999, I never would have learned the lessons you taught me. I never would have understood what it really means to be a Ferrari driver." Lewis heard Marco start to cry. Not the bitter tears of old pain, but something that sounded like relief, like wonder, like 25 years of darkness finally finding light. "Lewis, all these years I kept that letter. I read it whenever I felt like giving up. That 14-year-old boy's belief in me, it kept me alive. And now that 14-year-old boy gets to drive for Ferrari, carrying your dreams with him. Marco, don't you see? Your dream didn't die in 1999. It just took a different path to get here." Through his tears, Marco laughed. "So my Ferrari dream comes true after all. Just not the way I expected." "Exactly. When I put on that red suit for my first race, I'll be carrying a piece of your dream with me. And through the foundation, we'll make sure other young drivers get chances that politics can't take away." After they hung up, Lewis sat in the darkness of his hotel room, feeling the weight and beauty of how life could connect people across time and circumstance. A letter written by a 14-year-old had saved a man's life. That man's broken dreams had taught a champion about the true meaning of success. And now, those broken dreams would be transformed into opportunities for the next generation. Tomorrow, he would wake up as a Ferrari driver. But tonight he was simply Lewis Hamilton, grateful for the mysterious ways that dreams could die and be reborn, could be broken and made whole, could connect strangers across decades of time. Marco's dream of racing for Ferrari was finally coming true. It was just wearing a different face than anyone had expected. The story jumps forward to Lewis's first season with Ferrari. It's September, and the Italian Grand Prix at Monza has arrived, exactly 1 year after Marco's first confrontation with Lewis in the paddock. But everything has changed since then. Lewis stands on the starting grid, looking out at a sea of Ferrari fans waving red flags and screaming his name. The Tifosi have embraced him completely, and he can feel their energy lifting him up like a wave of pure emotion. In the Ferrari garage, Marco Santini watches nervously. He wears a special guest pass around his neck, invited by Lewis to witness this moment. Beside him stands Isabella Rossi, her face tight with anticipation. Their friendship has grown stronger over the past year, built on shared understanding and mutual forgiveness. The season has been challenging. Ferrari's car is competitive but not dominant. Lewis has won 3 races, in Barcelona, Silverstone, and Hungary, but he trails the championship leader by 15 points with 4 races remaining. Today at Monza could determine whether his first Ferrari season ends in glory or disappointment. "How are you feeling?" Isabella asks Marco as they watch the pre-race preparations. "Nervous," Marco admits. "Like my own dreams are on that starting grid." Isabella nods. "I feel the same way. Like we're both racing today somehow." The formation lap begins, and Lewis's Ferrari looks perfect as it glides around the historic Monza circuit. The car has been improving all season as the team learns how to extract speed from Lewis's unique driving style. Marco remembers testing on this same track 25 years ago, dreaming of racing here when it mattered. Now watching Lewis prepare for the race, Marco feels something he thought was lost forever: pure excitement about Formula One racing. The 5 red lights appear above the start line. Lewis's heartbeat pounds in his helmet as he focuses on the lights, waiting for them to go out. In his mind, Lewis carries Marco's words from their phone call 2 nights earlier. "When you're racing tomorrow, remember that speed is just the beginning. Real racing comes from the heart." The lights go out, and Lewis gets a perfect start. He moves from 3rd to 1st by the first corner, threading between 2 other cars with precision that makes the crowd roar with approval. The Ferrari responds to his inputs like it was built specifically for this moment. Over the radio comes Marco Bianchi's calm voice. "Perfect start, Lewis. Gap to second place is 1.2 seconds. The early laps are intense. Lewis builds his lead steadily while managing tire wear and fuel consumption. Behind him, a fierce battle develops for second place. But Lewis maintains his focus on his own race. On lap 20, a safety car is deployed after a minor incident. This bunches up the field and puts Lewis under immediate pressure. When racing resumes, he has the championship leader directly behind him, ready to attack. The next 15 laps become an instant classic. 2 champions fighting wheel to wheel for victory at Monza. Lewis defends brilliantly while also looking for opportunities to extend his lead. The crowd is on its feet for every corner. In the Ferrari garage, Marco grips his guest pass so tightly his knuckles turn white. "Come on, Lewis," he whispers. "Show them what Ferrari drivers can do." Isabella places a gentle hand on Marco's shoulder. "He's doing it," she says quietly. "He's living the dream for both of us." With 10 laps remaining, Lewis finds himself in second place after a brilliant move by his competitor. The championship math is simple. Lewis needs to win this race to keep his title hopes alive. What happens next will be remembered as one of the greatest drives in Ferrari history. Lewis digs deep, finding seed and racecraft that reminds everyone why he's a 7-time world champion. He starts hunting down the leader with determination that seems almost supernatural. Lap after lap, Lewis closes the gap. The Ferrari engine sings as he extracts every ounce of performance from the car. The crowd noise becomes deafening as they sense something special happening. With 3 laps to go, Lewis catches the leader. What follows is a battle that showcases everything beautiful about motor racing: skill, courage, respect, and pure competitive fire. On the final lap, Lewis makes a move into the first chicane that will be replayed for decades. It's perfectly judged, completely fair, and absolutely decisive. He takes the lead and holds it through the remaining corners to the checkered flag. The explosion of joy from the Ferrari garage is immediate and overwhelming. Mechanics jump on each other, engineers pump their fists in the air, and Fred Vasseur throws his headset in celebration. But the most emotional reaction comes from Marco Santini. As Lewis crosses the finish line to win at Monza for Ferrari, Marco breaks down completely. 25 years of pain, disappointment, and broken dreams pour out of him in tears of pure joy. Isabella wraps her arms around Marco as he sobs. "He did it," Marco keeps repeating. "He really did it. We did it." Isabella corrects him gently. "Your dream came true, Marco. Just not the way we expected." Lewis climbs out of his Ferrari and is immediately surrounded by his team. But through the chaos, He looks up at the garage and sees Marco crying tears of happiness. Their eyes meet across the celebrating crowd, and Lewis points directly at Marco, mouthing the words, "This is for you." The victory celebration is emotional beyond words. Lewis stands on the top step of the podium, looking out at 100,000 screaming Ferrari fans, holding the winner's trophy high above his head. The Italian national anthem plays, and Lewis feels connected to every Ferrari driver who has ever stood on this podium. In the post-race interview, Lewis is asked about the significance of winning at Monza for Ferrari. "This victory belongs to more than just me," Lewis says, his voice thick with emotion. "It belongs to everyone who has ever dreamed of racing for Ferrari, including those who never got their chance." The interviewer doesn't understand the reference, but Marco, watching from the garage, understands completely. After the interviews and media obligations, Lewis finds Marco in a quiet corner of the Ferrari hospitality unit. Marco is still emotional, still processing what he has witnessed. "Lewis, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Marco says, his voice shaky. "Watching you win at Monza in a Ferrari, it felt like my 18-year-old self's wildest dream coming true." Lewis embraces Marco warmly. "It was your dream, Marco. I was just the driver." "No, Lewis, you were so much more than that. You were hope. You were proof that dreams don't die, they just transform." Isabella joins them, her own eyes bright with tears. "Marco's right. What you did today, it healed something that we thought was broken forever." Lewis looks at both of them, two people who had found their way back from devastating loss to something like peace and happiness. "You both taught me what it really means to be a Ferrari driver. It's not just about winning races. It's about carrying the dreams of everyone who loves this sport." Marco nods. "And Lewis, there's something I need to tell you. After watching you race today, after seeing what you've accomplished, I'm not angry anymore. For the first time in 25 years, I'm not carrying that bitterness around." "What changed?" Marco's smile is genuine and peaceful. "I realized that my dream didn't die in 1999. It was just waiting for the right person to carry it forward. Watching you win today, I felt like I was winning too. Like all those years of disappointment finally led to something beautiful." Isabella takes both their hands. "I think we've all learned something important. Sometimes the most powerful dreams are the ones we pass on to others." Lewis squeezes their hands. "Marco, Isabella, I want to make you both a promise. Every time I race in Ferrari red, I'll carry this feeling with me. I'll remember what this sport can take from people, but also what it can give back." As evening falls over Monza, three people who had been brought together by broken dreams stand together, united by the understanding that sometimes healing comes not from fixing what was broken, but from building something new and beautiful from the pieces. Lewis has won his first race at Monza for Ferrari, but more importantly, he has helped heal wounds that had been bleeding for 25 years. And in doing so, he has learned the true meaning of what it means to wear Ferrari red, not just as a champion, but as a guardian of dreams. 3 months after his victory at Monza, Lewis stood on a stage in London, looking out at an audience of young drivers, racing officials, journalists, and motorsport legends. Today was the official launch of the Marco Santini Foundation for Racing Excellence, and the energy in the room felt electric with possibility. Behind Lewis on a large screen was the foundation's mission statement: to ensure that talent, not background or connections, determines who gets opportunities in motorsport. In the front row sat Marco Santini, wearing a suit for the first time Lewis had ever seen. Next to him sat Isabella Rossi, who had become one of the foundation's largest donors. Both looked proud but nervous, knowing they were about to be thrust into a spotlight they had never sought. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lewis began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "racing has given me everything. 7 world championships, victories with 3 different teams, and experiences I could never have imagined as a child in Stevenage." The audience listened intently as Lewis continued. "But success in racing has also taught me something else. That for every driver who achieves their dreams, there are many others who never get the chance to show what they can do." Lewis gestured toward Marco. "I want to tell you about a man who taught me the true cost of those lost opportunities. Marco Santini, please stand up." Marco rose slowly, his face reddening as hundreds of people turned to look at him. He hadn't wanted this attention, But Lewis had convinced him it was necessary to help other young drivers understand what was at stake. In 1999, Marco was Ferrari's fastest test driver. Lewis continued. When Michael Schumacher was injured, Marco should have gotten the race seat. He had the talent, the speed, and the dedication. But he didn't have the right family connections or political support. The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were hearing something important. Marco's racing career was destroyed not by lack of ability but by forces beyond his control. He spent the next 25 years watching other drivers live the dream that should have been his. Lewis's voice became stronger. But Marco's story doesn't end with disappointment. It ends with hope. Lewis walked to the edge of the stage, closer to his audience. When I was 14 years old, I wrote a fan letter to Marco Santini. I told him he was my hero, and that watching him test for Ferrari made me believe dreams could come true. Several people in the audience gasped as they began to understand the connection. Marco kept that letter for 25 years. During his darkest moments, when he thought about giving up on everything, he would read that letter from a young British karting driver who believed in him. Marco wiped tears from his eyes as Lewis continued the story. That letter kept Marco alive during the worst period of his life. And because Marco survived, because he kept going, he was able to teach me lessons about racing and life that no textbook could ever provide. Lewis looked directly at Marco. My Ferrari dream came true partly because Marco's Ferrari dream was broken. But now, through this foundation, we're going to make sure Marco's broken dream becomes the foundation for hundreds of other young drivers' successes. The audience erupted in applause. But Lewis held up his hand to continue. This foundation will provide scholarships for talented young drivers who can't afford to race at the highest levels. We'll offer mentorship programs to help them navigate the political challenges of motorsport. And most importantly, we'll create a support network so no young driver has to face the barriers alone. Lewis introduced the foundation's first group of scholarship recipients, 12 young drivers from around the world who had shown exceptional talent but lacked the financial resources to advance their careers. Sofia Martinez, the 18-year-old Spanish driver Lewis had met before, spoke on behalf of the group. 6 months ago, I thought my racing career was over because my family couldn't afford to continue. Today, because of the Marco Santini Foundation, I have a full scholarship to compete in Formula 3. She turned to Marco, who was still emotional from Lewis's speech. Mr. Santini, I know your racing dreams were taken away unfairly. But because you survived that disappointment, because you kept believing in the sport even when it hurt you, my dreams are now possible. Thank you for not giving up. Marco stood again, this time more confidently. Sophia, Lewis asked me to speak today and I was terrified. I've never been good at public speaking, and I wasn't sure what to say to all of you. His voice grew stronger as he continued. But watching these young drivers, seeing their excitement and determination, realized something important. My dream of racing for Ferrari didn't die in 1999. It just took a different path to get there. Marco looked at Lewis. When I watch Lewis race in Ferrari Red, I see my 18-year-old self's dreams coming true. And now, through this foundation, I get to help make sure other young drivers don't face the same barriers I faced. Isabella Rossi stood to address the audience. My name is Isabella Rossi, and my family's company has been involved in motorsport for decades. I'm here today to admit something publicly. 25 years ago, my family used our business influence to block Marco's career advancement. The audience stirred with surprise at this admission. We were wrong, Isabella continued firmly. Business interests should never determine which drivers get opportunities to race. That's why Rossi Automotive has pledged €5 million to the Marco Santini Foundation over the next 5 years. She looked at Marco with genuine affection. Marco, I can't give you back your racing career, but I can help ensure that talented young drivers today don't face the same obstacles you faced. The formal presentations continued for another hour, with racing legends, team principals, and young drivers all speaking about the importance of creating fair opportunities in motorsport. But the most powerful moment came at the end, when Lewis, Marco, and Isabella stood together on stage, representing different generations and different perspectives united by a common goal. This foundation exists because of one simple truth, Lewis said in his closing remarks. Dreams are too precious to be destroyed by politics or prejudice. Every young person who loves racing deserves a chance to show what they can do. He gestured to the scholarship recipients sitting in the front rows. These 12 young drivers represent hundreds more who will benefit from this foundation in the years to come. Some of them will become world champions. Others will become engineers, team managers, or racing instructors. All of them will carry forward the values that Marco taught me, that talent should be rewarded, that fairness matters, and that broken dreams can become the foundation for other people's success. After the ceremony ended, Lewis found himself in a quiet corridor with Marco and Isabella. The formal event was over, but the real work was just beginning. "How do you feel?" Lewis asked Marco. "Different," Marco replied honestly. "For 25 years I defined myself by what was taken from me. Today, for the first time, I'm defining myself by what I can give to others." Isabella nodded. "We've all learned something important. The past doesn't have to determine the future, but it can inform it. Our experiences, even the painful ones, have value if we use them to help others." Lewis looked at both of them. Two people who had spent decades carrying the weight of broken dreams and wrong choices, now transformed into guardians of other people's hopes. "Marco, Isabella, I want you both to know something. Starting this foundation, bringing your stories into the light, has taught me more about being a champion than any race I've ever won." Marco smiled. "Lewis, that letter you wrote to me when you were 14, you said watching me made you believe dreams could come true. Now watching these young drivers today, I finally believe that myself." As they walked out of the venue together, Lewis thought about the mysterious ways that life could connect people across troth and circumstance. A 14-year-old's fan letter had saved a man's life. That man's broken dreams had taught a champion about the true meaning of success. And now, those broken dreams were being transformed into opportunities for the next generation. Outside the London venue, the 12 scholarship recipients were taking photos with their families, their faces bright with excitement about their futures. Watching them, Lewis realized that Marco's Ferrari dream had finally come true. It was just bigger and more beautiful than anyone had ever imagined. The Marco Santini Foundation would go on to help hundreds of young drivers over the coming years. Some would reach Formula One, others would find success in different racing series, and many would become teachers and mentors themselves, passing on the cycle of dreams and support. But the real victory had already been won. In a London hotel room where Lewis Hamilton learned that some choices can't be undone, but they can be transformed into something meaningful and beautiful. Marco Santini never got to race for Ferrari. But through Lewis Hamilton's success and the foundation that bore his name, Marco's dreams lived on in ways that were far more powerful than any single racing career could ever be. Sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that help other people win. We'd love to know, where are you listening from today? Drop your location in the comments below and let us know what you thought of Marco and Isabella's story. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that sometimes our greatest victories come from helping others win, please give this video a like. Your support helps us create more meaningful stories like this one. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for many more interesting videos that explore the human side of sports. The power of second chances and stories that prove kindness can change everything. Finally, please share this video with your friends and family. In a world that sometimes feels divided, stories like Marco's and Lewis's remind us that healing is possible, that broken dreams can become beautiful foundations for others, and that one person's courage to listen and care can transform multiple lives. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest champions are the ones who lift others up along the way.